back to Nothing But a Number. Today I'm joined by Valerie McKie, a behavioural analyst specialising in relationship coaching and conflict resolution, with a rich career spanning roles such as policy advocate with the Trussell Trust and a member of their Transforming Together team. Valerie brings a wealth of experience in public speaking and public policy. You've overcome, I know, Valerie, a wealth of significant personal challenges, including being widowed at the age of 55 and rebuilding your life. I know Valerie's resilience and dedication to her work are truly inspiring. Now approaching 72, I think we can say that. She's currently writing a book titled Heart Set, A Guide to Being True to Yourself. It's great to welcome. Is it Valerie or Val?
Oh, call me Val. Valerie if I'm in trouble, Joe.
Well, you're not in trouble. You're absolutely not in trouble. So it's great to have you here, Val. You've done so much in terms of kind of personal development. Talk me through, that sort of journey that you've been on.
Right. Okay. I started as a child, I always wanted to understand why people did what they did. I could not figure it out. And I think mainly because I had no idea why I did what I did. And I looked at I must have been a right pain to my teachers because I was always challenging everything. And it was, well, why would it be like this? To the point at which I went to a small Church of England church school. And on the way to Harvest Festival when I was 9, I was going, I don't know why we're going. You've told me God doesn't interfere. So why are we going to thank God for the harvest? Because I didn't understand the principle. So you can imagine my teachers sort of threw their hands up in horror.
So you're a bit precocious.
Yes, I was a pain, a complete pain. And I think, and really quite literal. If you say something, well, then prove it or don't prove it. And I went on to do, I was one of the few children in my school that went to grammar school. Because we were just a small village, and it meant that I had to travel a huge 11 minutes on a train to go to a grammar school nearby, and I actually found that incredibly stressful, and I was incredibly shy, which was a very interesting combination of being. So that was that. Basically, I wouldn't go to university when I left the grammar school because the transition had been so huge, and I can remember when we brought in comprehensives going, I can see the damage that this could do. I'm thinking I couldn't cope in those early days at a 500 all-girl grammar school. So what does a person cope with 1,500 pupils and being completely lost? Anyway, I sort of went on, and the early part of my career, I remember having to do jury duty, and this was a significantly changing moment in my life. I had to do jury duty when I was 18, and I was absolutely petrified. It meant I had to go into Liverpool, which was like the big town. and I can remember sitting in this room, as before you get called for trial, with about 100 other people, being just so frightened. And the chap who was sat next to me, who to me looked really old, but was probably only about 30, was shaking. And I was like, I'm going to need to do something because clearly there's something wrong. And I sort of leaned over and just said, can I do anything? Because I think one of my values is actually about caring for people. And he said, no, I'm just nervous. And I remember, and I was so shocked by that. And I'm like, well, why is this old chap nervous? And then I looked around the room. So I looked beyond myself to see what was going on around the room. And I noticed that there were signs of nervousness in anyone. And I think that was the first time I went, oh, it's not just me. And so that was a hugely significant moment. Anyway, I went on to, my first job was as a Saturday girl in the local newsagent shop, and I loved it so much. Because that gap between myself and the other people, that ended my shyness. It was a protection. And I knew then how much I just loved working and being with people. So I went on to I did a degree in my 30s in social science, thinking that I was going to change the world. And because now I knew everything, which of course I didn't. But actually, nobody wanted to employ me at 30, in my 30s, with a degree. I thought it was going to open up a whole new world, and it didn't. And I ended up working for a training company, teaching young people on youth training programmes. And that was a real eye-opener. They were from the poorest parts of Liverpool. They hadn't been at school for many a year. And they were on a retail training programme because actually nobody thought there was anything more that could be done. And it was definitely at a time, and I still think we still have that, where retail's considered almost like the lowest of occupations, and people don't understand the skill that people need for that. Anyway, my first morning with these young people was very interesting because they literally ran riot around me. And I was like, right, okay. And so I spoke to a colleague and said, okay, what do I do now? And he was like, you basically go and read the Riot Act. Go in and read the Riot Act. So I did that thing, which I think teachers are well known to do, which is tell my group that they were the worst group I'd ever taught. It was true, because I hadn't taught a group before then. And they were silenced. But what was really interesting for me was because you could sense the need in these young people for care, for being thought of and caring. So after we'd and then the interesting challenge that we had, and I think the thing that made the difference was that was just at the time of Hillsborough. And so it was only a few weeks in that Hillsborough happened. And so I saw that on the news, and of course my first thought was, who's going to be there? I can't even think, just one of my gang aren't going to be there. And we used to stand and watch them come in from where it was and sort of there. And as the young people came in, we kind of all got together and we talked about it. And then and they would join us. We looked out the window a bit more and looked out the window a bit more. Unfortunately, everyone was there. But that created a bond, I think, between me and them.
Can I ask you, you said that you felt that it was obvious that there was a need for care.
Yes.
And that was couched with discipline as well,
yes.
because, there's a reading the Riot Act
yes.
is both discipline
yes.
and showing that you care, that
yes.
it matters how
yes.
they behave. To what extent do you think, have we got the balance right between sort of punishment and showing that we care as a society?
No, I don't think we do. I think it's a very big issue. I think that it's, and it depends where someone comes from. I mean, ultimately, one of the things they say is you can make a decision about someone and you can go, are they sad, mad or bad? Yeah. And I have always gone for sad. Yeah. People are crying out for something. And I'm not sure who wrote this, but said everything in life is either a cry for love or a gift of love. But of course you've got so much social conditioning. And so if people haven't felt cared for, then it's hard. And then of course they can't actually trust care when it comes. And I think if we look at an awful lot of our social problems, I mean, I talk to a lot of people, who we see homeless in the streets. And I haven't heard a single story yet that hasn't come from a point of grief where someone has been lost, be it a sibling or a parent or a child. And I could, it's interesting because I can relate to the feelings I had when my husband died, because I referred to it as the worst pain I'd ever known, and I likened it to being pinned to the wall with a dagger through my heart. And I think that if you can't, and I couldn't process it because denial was my big thing. So I focused outwards, but actually inside I was in a turmoil that I couldn't even recognise. And I see that quite a lot. But I think, of course, the further down someone goes into this, the less that they're able to trust that it's safe now. Mm-hmm. And the more likely to be let down. And I think there's this danger, and I think I think we all do this to a degree. Life can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If this is how I expect someone to behave, ultimately they will. Because the way that I behave towards them will lead to that.
And so was there somebody or a group of people there during your darkest moments
Yes.
that kind of lifted you up? Because I know it took a while, didn't it, for you to recover?
Yes.
Recover's maybe the wrong word, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
To sort of find a meaningful future in life.
Yes. I think what was interesting was, because as I say, denial is my first thing. And I remember my husband, before he died, saying to me, oh, will you be okay? And I went, oh, of course I'll be okay, because I've always been very much, you come to Anti-Val, Anti-Val sorts everything out for everybody. And I remembered saying, I should just focus my whole attention on everybody else, which in essence is what I did, which meant that I was just burying the grief and it had to come out. And so in the first instance, at the beginning, it was terrible, but I started to rebuild life back pretty much to how it was. And then other things happened on top of that, which was interesting in terms of, so I just started to rebuild things, but I was living in rented accommodation and my landlord had to sell my property. Literally. And I always said it could only happen to me, to actually somebody who had been diagnosed with a brain tumour. And wanted to move. She'd chosen my house as the one she wanted to live in for whatever reason. So I didn't even have time to find somewhere else, because he asked me, would I mind sort of moving out? And a friend of mine had said, oh, come and stay with me. And in my world, it was a no-choice option. How could I say no to somebody who was dying with a brain tumour with 2 young children that she wanted to firmly establish near her mum, where we lived. So I said that. So it was an unplanned move, and a shock. So there was that. And then one of probably my loyalist customers, actually they had to make, they didn't go to the wall, but their particular part of the business was closed down. So I went through the grief of supporting the people who had worked there. It was a small factory in St Helens, and people had worked there most of their lives. So I had the grief of supporting them, and then finding and then I was kind of left. So, but my great problem, Joe, was I was one of those people who never asked for help. I would always put on that brave face, and that was the big mistake. And so ultimately, things just spiraled downwards. And as I say, I hadn't intentionally meant to be without a home, but then once I was without a home, and then I was scammed on the internet, and that just basically finished me off. And so I just became, I spent nearly 3 years, living between friends, having no roots, no home, nothing. Living on what was my small private pension that I'd taken out at that time. Didn't think to ask anybody for anything. And then I literally, funnily enough, was in London, and with £5 in my pocket for a week. I was staying with a friend. I could have asked my friend for help, but I wouldn't. I went everywhere on my bus pass, because I was 60 then. So thank goodness for my bus pass. And when that finished, I went, no, now this is enough now. You have to, this stops. So what I then did was I went to, I decided I wanted to go back to my hometown where my family was. I rented a room there, and I did that for a couple of years, and then finally I moved into rented. It was once I moved back into having a home of my own, courtesy of a very dear friend who was very happy to have me there. And that was when once I had that sorted, and I think it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when something like the roof over your head is insecure, everything else is insecure then. And it was that then that gave me the impetus to kind of go, just what have you been doing? And I look back on those 3 years as interesting, and not as scary as I would have thought, because I made the best of it most of the time. I had one of my friends, and she would ring me fairly regularly, and she goes, I'm only phoning you to find out where you are. She said, because you could be anywhere in the country. And it was true. It was true, because I literally had most of my possessions in my car. I loved my car. That was the one thing that was never going. And that was quite quirky. But yes, it was an interesting time. And it was only when I came beyond that, only once I had a secure home again, was I able to get back and think, right, now what am I going to do with my life? And that was the difference. And it was when and it was interesting because I think we all have books that make a difference to us. And one of the books that made a difference to me was a book called The Celestine Prophecy.
I've read it.
Well, it tells us all about secrets, why we're sat here today,
Absolutely.
Joe.
Yeah.
And obviously that was one of the books that changed my life, because I literally did what I'd done all those years ago when I was 18. I lifted my head up and out and I went, okay, the time, it's time now. And I was, I've been grateful for the experiences, because I'm not as scared now of something like that happening again, because once you've done it once, you can do it again. It's not something that I would choose to ever do again, but it can be done. And it gives me that I think I can see, as I say, going from working with young people to talking to people we see rough sleeping, to just talking to other people. It's that knowing that we need to create that underbed of that. I think what they call, roots and wings, a safe place to land for people that doesn't create dependency. That's the key. And it's that. So it's going to take a lot more energy and effort than we realise. But actually, when we do that, and I think we can do that and we will do that, when we do that, then we will actually see the benefits, because we're all just human beings. And it's going to take longer and be more costly. But that's the problem with the system, where as you know yourself, Joe, you're in power and then you're out of power. It's very difficult to create a long-term strategy, and these things require long-term strategies.
No, absolutely. It's really interesting that you said that it was at the age of 60 that actually that renaissance happened, if you like, that you saw the light, and you finally recognised that as a strong woman you don't need to not ask for help, and recognise that actually, you're part of that kind of that bigger world, and things need to be done.
Yes.
The whole reason that I set up this podcast was to say that if 70 is the new 60, 60 is the new 45 probably. And yet, as a society, we're still talking about, well, we wanted to put your feet up and start knitting, or, take up gardening, and sort of become less productive as you hit sort of 60 plus. Yes. What can we do to change that narrative? Because it really is quite embedded, isn't it, in our society?
I think so. I mean, I think we've embedded it in ourselves as well. I mean, I don't know about you, Joe, but I never woke up one morning and went, oh, today I'm a grown-up. That never happened. And I think it's probably, I have a lot of sort of young people who are friends, but sort of people now in their sort of 30s, which is really quite interesting. So at 18, 30 look really old, but now and I think it's working and supporting them. I think we just model it and share and talk and do the thing. I mean, I started writing my book just a bit before I was 70.
Explain. Did you wake up one morning and go, I'm going to write a book? Or have you been sort of preparing the chapters in your head over decades?
No, I think what it was a classic. It was actually a classic for me, in that, I mean, lots of people had told me I should write down some of the stuff that I say, and I'd be, yeah, that's fine. And then I had a friend down in, a friend down south, and we'd been involved in a number of things, and she was not having a good time. And we'd been to, she was into property development, and we'd been on one of these property development seminar things, and there was a chap there talked about they had this program that you could go on to help you write a book. But the most important thing for me about it was that the program was at the Darling Buds of May farm in Kent, and I totally loved Darling Buds of May. So I looked at my friend, and my friend really wanted to well, no, it was about a property course, and that was it. I didn't want to go on that. But my friend was really into it, and we had one of these, like they do, 2 for the price of 1 things. And I'm going, Darling Buds of May Farm, this will help my friend. Let's do it. And it was literally like that, we'll do it, because she'd been so good to me. And so we went, and at the end of this programme, a guy called Rick McMahon, talked about, he had this programme that would, support you to write a book. And I went, do you know what, I think I'd quite like to do that. And I literally just went, I think I'll do that. I shall sign up for that and do that. And not that I finished it within the timescale for Rick, so I was, like I was at school, not the best pupil. But the name came to me quite quickly, because I talked a lot in the work that I do about mindset, it's about our thinking. Yeah. But I actually know that it goes much deeper than what we think. So you can have as many positive affirmations in all the world that you like. And it's a bit like, I had, as a child, I had an elephant that I'd made in crafts. And you had the elephant, and then you had the howdah on the top with all the sparkly stuff, and I love that elephant. Don't know what happened to it. And it's a bit like, if our heart's not in tune, our mind is just like the howdah on the top of the elephant, and that can be going that way, but trust me, the elephant's going another way. And I think the great thing for me was. And it came from actually when I read the Celestine Prophecy, coming across Jungian psychology, which is about script theory, and talking about the script that we write for ourselves, for the story of our lives. Another great book, which is What Do You Say After You Say Hello by Eric Byrne. Really brilliant. I read this book, and see, my script character, the person I'd modelled my life on was Jane Eyre. I loved Jane Eyre with a passion. From age 9, Jane Eyre. Well, if you read the story of Jane Eyre always did the right thing. No matter what happened, she always did the right thing. So when she finds out the man she's going to marry is already married, she doesn't sort of, complain. She just goes off into the wilderness, into the wild blue yonder. So I was very much Jane.
I think I was Tessa the D'Urberville. Yeah. That's very worrying, isn't it, really?
But the great thing about it, the absolutely great thing about it is, and I could just, I still have a fondness for Jane all these years later, but I'd become involved with a really difficult work problem with someone that I wrote a fairy story about, which is really interesting. Ooh. It came right out of the blue. And I wrote this small fairy story because this person had been, a bit like the villain in what's the Follow the Yellow Brick Road story. That one is nowhere near as big as it was. I actually wrote. I redesignated myself a princess. Mm. So I, as the princess, to sort out this issue with the sort of the people who ran the organisation so I made it like a royal court, so they had a king and a queen and a princess who did like fun things and that, and then I created this character with this little elf as a character, right, who was this person that everyone was afraid of, and had created that. So I wrote this story about him as a naughty little elf, and it was fascinating because people would come to my office. I used to laugh and say I had story time, because I'd moved from teaching the young people on youth training programs to actually managers. I have to say that there was an awful lot they could have learnt from some of the young people I taught, but that's a different story. But within that, so people would come to my office and I would read them a story and I'd write a story, and it took the person's power away. Quite literally took it away, because they were no longer afraid, because they would just remember a line I'd written.
It's very interesting, isn't it? I know I've done quite a lot of leadership training workshops and things, and Lego often plays a big part, and it is that thing of once you become unguarded and it's playtime rather than serious managerial stuff. People find out an awful lot about themselves that they wouldn't otherwise. And I know, I used to chair a group of the Academy of Chief Executives, which was a kind of peer support group. Yes. And we used to use the word love a lot. Yes. Because people's challenges as leaders were as much about family issues as they were about workforce. And if you try and sort of segment human beings into, well, that's me at work and that's me at home, and you know, we are all we're all living our best life, or we try to, but everybody has complex needs, don't they?
Yes.
And I think it's interesting how those you know, cannot help but seep through into every aspect of our lives. And you've talked about some of the influences. Has there been a key person, or you mentioned books along the way that's sort of either helped you change direction or kind of boosted your confidence in knowing that you were heading in the right direction?
I would have to say no. In reality, having said that, I am completely inspired by Emma Reevey, who's the CEO of the Trussell Trust, because Emma has managed to create for me an organisation where care and compassion run through it like the writing in a stick of rock. And the work that I've done with them it's been one of the best organisations I've ever worked for, and actually has given me a lot more confidence in a way that I didn't know I needed.
Yeah. You're listening to Nothing But a Number, the podcast that looks at age and ageing with a wide array of fabulous guests. We've got some brilliant guests coming in the next few weeks, and if you want to be notified when the next upload is, please subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll tell you exactly what's coming next. So what do you do within? You have a sort of an ambassador role?
Yes. I mean, basically, I share my story of what happened to me in life, because one of the great issues that we have is the stigma that there is around poverty, and that sort of sense of shame that's built it. And I very much had that. As I say, I never looked like anyone who knew me. If I was at meetings, that would never know exactly what you were saying before about the inner turmoil and just how difficult, it was. And doing all those things, like, I think if you know the story of Pretty Woman, not that I look like Julia Roberts, but, there is something about, you have a couple of really good set piece clothes and it's that thing. And of course, what happens is that you think you're the only one, but you're not.
Yes.
And I remember being at a conference in Los Angeles, talking to a woman absolutely immaculately, she was been living in her car for 2 years. And that, but of course, while you feel the shame and stigma, you can't get help, because you can't tell anyone what you're going through.
And people don't know, because
people don't know.
You're covering it up, basically.
Exactly. And I think, it's the interesting thing about the cost of living crisis is it enables people to be a bit more open about the situation that they're in. But I mean, we still have, I think, a narrative that goes through. There's nothing that makes me smile more than when someone says, people on universal credit, they just need to budget better. Yes. And I'm like, no, when you have very little, trust me, you budget really, really well. Yeah. But what people don't understand is, and I liken it to, and, this analogy is used for different things, but, I think all of us at some point in our lives have had a bill that is bigger than we thought it was going to be. And we've kind of gone, that's more than I thought. But, fortunately people, are in a situation where they can pay it. But I liken it to, that's like a bit like a mosquito bite, right? Now, when you're on a very low income, you get endless mosquito bites, day after day after day. And then you do have the constant, the pressing down of how do I manage? And I think if you have children, that's even worse, because it's not just you. I mean, I only had to fend for me. But when you've got children, that is just beyond anything. And people respond to it in different ways. But it literally shuts us down as human beings. So in terms of our potential to be productive, it disappears out the window. And whilst at a logical level, if you need more money, go out and work and get a bit more. Yeah. The reality is, I mean, I have some interesting thoughts on what we're referring to as a mental health crisis, because actually what I see as having is natural reactions to abnormal human conditions. We aren't supposed to live this way, and but as I say, we've got this narrative going on that's gone on through, through history.
Yes.
It is like I say, I mean, I personally do believe that we can end poverty once and for all. But never in recorded human history has there been a generation that hasn't known poverty. But just because it's always been doesn't mean it always will be.
So how would you end poverty?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You set yourself up for that.
I should have known that. Well, I think we start to care. So we take the stigma out. We actually start to look at, and that's where we need long-term policies, because it starts with young people. It starts in schools. I can remember saying to my young people when I was teaching them on youth training, saying, if you'd been educated at Eton, you wouldn't be sat here today. To which they replied, "What's Eton?" And so having to go through all of that. But it is around changing the conditions that young people have been brought up with, supporting families, so that taking that pressure away, that constant pressure, understanding that it's there, moving away from being as judgmental as we are, in terms of it's an interesting debate for people, because we see it. I think somebody said to talking about people come to a food bank. And someone saying, well, did they really need it? And the member of staff saying, getting a free food parcel is not a prize. The fact that you've been driven to that point, and so it is around, we've got to create what for me, the welfare state was set up to create, which was a safety net. It needs to be a safety net, not a trap, because once you're in it now, it's incredibly difficult because of, if you've not been in that position to say, as we started with universal credit, that you can have a wait of time. When people have got no money, literally no money, that is just ridiculous.
Yes.
And it's that move. And I mean, I remember in sort of my years of, management development training, the one thing, and apologies to any accountant listening to this, was you never put the finance director in charge of the business, because it was short-term thinking and they were incredibly risk averse. So we have to take some risks, and we have to understand that it might not always work, but we take risks in every other sphere. And I think it is, it's supporting people, it's properly supporting people. It's not penalising people, it's not criminalising people. So there are things we stop doing straight away.
Yeah.
Then we stop doing that. We provide the support that people need. We recognise that it's going to cost. But ultimately, in the longer term, and this is the difference between short-term costs and long-term costs. So if we don't do something now, the long-term costs are going to be far greater, and that's the issue. We're going to see, we see it already. We see the, more and more people, requiring the NHS, right? More and more people in terms of, well, you've got to look at the criminal justice, you've got to look at everything. How many young people are, we're old enough to remember when West Side Story was a great story.
Yes.
Right? And the gangs and that, but that's what we're watching, that's what we're witnessing. And so, I look back to my young people, and we're talking back, back in the 80s when I taught them, the pressures on them now is even worse. And then with social media and all the rest, we need to do something, I think, about, I came on the train this morning, nobody's doing anything other than looking at their mobile phone. Yeah. We've got to rebuild communities, we've got to rebuild that connection, and people, and I think it's around, and I do absolutely see, we don't want to create dependency, but the journey in life is A, to independence, and then B, to interdependence. So we need a system that is built to create interdependence and community and bring that back. And it was one of the good things that we saw in COVID. I mean, for me, the one thing I didn't like when we had COVID was people kept talking about getting back to normal. And I was going, we don't want to get back to normal. We want to get back to something better than it was. We want to remember the thing that was important. It was the community, people coming together, people helping each other out. And it was one of those things that I said, those who can do, those who can't don't. It's not, You don't become somebody. I know a number of the people that I've worked with, colleagues that I've met through my work with Trussell and Turn to Us, where, you know, they want to put something back in. I just never wanted, none of us want to be dependent upon somebody else to provide for us. We want to provide for ourselves. That's within us. But if there is no hope of it, and if you've lived in an area, you know, I've got areas close to me where, you know, you're third or fourth generation that have never been able to get out of that poverty trap. And finding it, but it's not that these people are any different to the rest of us. Mm-hmm. We're all just human beings responding to put anyone in that. As I say, how many mosquito bites do you need before you actually just collapse because your system's poisoned?
Yes. Do you see a role for, or is the role government role or a community role, or you know, a combination of the two? Because I mean, you quite right in which you say that it's not an economic problem. It has to be looked at in a different way. And yes, you know, we've just now got a new Labour government that is obsessed with fiscal responsibility. We, you know, had an outgoing government that was obsessed with cutting taxes, and the messaging around how we solve some of the inherently structural challenges of, you know, people who are not able to get by, quite frankly, has not been one that any party has really come up with a solution to. I mean, I've lobbied long and hard for more investment in community infrastructure, you know, and sort of social fabric, but it doesn't strike me that government's very good at that. And this isn't, you know, this isn't party political. It's just kind of a general statement. And so, you know, I'm not sure how we manage to achieve that through government.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because there is, I mean, you know, and it is this sort of polemics on both sides. Whereas I think it's a combination of us all. It's about creating the system. It's the system that I'm a member of something called the Deming Alliance, which is based upon the work of Edward Deming, who was responsible for the Japanese economic miracle after the Second World War. Now, one of the things that he had talked about is it's the system that creates the behaviour. And a lot of the research shows that and I've even been involved. They have an experiment called the red bead experiment, which demonstrates that no matter how hard you try, the system beats you, right? Yeah. But I was still that. It's a very simple thing that you do. You just put, it's like a paddle with beads in, and you have to get as few red beads in this thing of white beads. And trust me, and, you know, I'm there and I'm absolutely determined that it's going to be that big. You can't do it because the system doesn't allow it to happen because that's the way that it is. But there's still that part of you that goes, well, I might just be the one who might just get
it's
it.
It's like the lottery, isn't it? Really?
It is. It totally is. So it's recognising that, you know, there's that in there. Within it, but I think it's about creating a system which facilitates things to be better rather than worse. So I do think, you know, at the moment, I think the challenge is you know, to create a social security system that actually works for people, that doesn't have people coming to food banks. I mean, you know, at Trussell we talk about, you know, our ultimate role is to create a society where there is no need for food banks. And Joe, you and I remember a time there didn't used to be food banks.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it just never happened. But I think if we take the good thing that came from that, it's just how many people have come together to support that. And we want that kind of community action to create something, to create that space where people can just be their best. So we've got a system that brings out the worst in people, not the best in people. So we need to sit down and talk about it. And quite frankly, we all come together and talk about it. Trust me, we will come up with something that is way beyond anything that we can imagine. If we could imagine it now, we'd have done it. but we can't.
Well, I'd like to think we would, but I'm not sure. I'm not that optimistic.
No, well, I am ever the optimist, but I think it is around, and it's like you were saying in business, when you do something that unlocks the creative powers of our minds, there's stuff, you know, we can't see what it is because it hasn't happened, but is it Steve Jobs who says, you know, you see the dots backwards. It'll look really obvious when we've done it.
Yes.
But while we're in it, it's just like a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with, the will and belief. Do we believe it's possible? And I think the interesting thing, because I work with another of my colleagues, and I've been passionate about, you know, I would say my great ambition is world peace. Mm-hmm. Right, and I would say I don't look a bit like Miss World, right? but there's a couple of fundamental. It's easier to look at these fundamental beliefs when it comes to peace, because whenever I say that to people always say the same thing. Val, they kind of pat me on the head like I don't know, and they go, Val, it's human nature to fight. I go, actually, it's human nature to survive, but we believe that fighting ensures survival, right? Despite the fact that all statistics show us massively that is so not true, right? So fundamentally not true, but we believe it. But one of the reasons why we believe it, because we've all been hurt and got angry. We've all done that. We've all wanted to lash out at someone at some point for something that they have done that hurts us. So it kind of makes sense in the brain. But then we have another thing, right, which is war is an adrenaline turn on, right? If we think of peace, what do we think of? And we tend to think, and I always say, that most classic line, what do we talk about someone when they've passed away? Rest in peace. So you're looking for something that sparks adrenaline to something that is like, well, it's associated with the one thing that we're not really prepared as a society to deal with, which is death. So actually, you've got other things playing out within that process. Yes. And it's just about shifting what that would look like, because, of course, and I've done it. I've been that adrenaline junkie. Oh, you know, I'll leave everything to, you know, I'll overload myself with stuff and the adrenaline will get me through. But actually, we want to move into flow. As a society, we want to move into flow. In flow, things come easy. One of the hardest things, I think, to accept is that life could be easy. Life's supposed to be easy and joyous. It's not. It's the transition from endurement to enjoyment. Yeah. And like you say, and I've had similar comments, you know, with senior people. They have to do the serious side of management. Yes. And then you give them an exercise and they start to laugh and have fun, but they don't. The interesting is, and funnily enough, all the serious side of stuff actually doesn't get them anywhere. No. You know, I mean, it's Einstein that says a problem cannot be solved, you know, in the dimension in which we created it. So we've created it here. It's going to come through that innate creativity. We need to unlock that. Yes. And you don't need an MBA to do that. No, you don't. You don't. And I was, you know, I always said some of, you know, we put people through a system. We put young people through a system. That I know it's quite different now in schools, I think, than it was when I was there, but we put them through a system where they have to conform, and then we tell them to be entrepreneurs. So we've trained you to do one thing, and now we're going to tell you to do something else. And yes, I personally, you know, when I was, you know, out in Russia, sort of teaching entrepreneurship, one of the first things that I went is, do you know what? People have not been paid for a long time. Trust me, there's a huge amount of entrepreneurial spirit in there.
It's not official.
No. But how do you survive? And I think it's that. I think, you know, sort of 100 years ago, people used to produce papers that shared ideas, and that other people would debate and produce their other papers. We need, I think, a lot more of that. A lot more of really healthy debate about this, and because we make our judgments on such a small percentage of things, you know. There is a small percentage of tax fraud. That does not mean that we need to create a whole system to deal with that. We just acknowledge that happens. And reasons why does that happen? What is it about it? I mean, I find it astounding, and I keep saying, and I'm saying this on air with you, Nadia, that we need a hashtag, which is why wouldn't we? It's just why, if we have a lot, why wouldn't we share it? What's going on? What's happening for people that they can't share? What is it? Where's the scarcity in that? Where is that you can only sleep in one bed. You can only eat one meal at a time. You can only live in one home at a time. It's people are. It's not. It's like you say. The economic issue. This is the symptom. It's not the root cause. It's that something in there for people, and of course it's also completely overwhelming. I mean, you go to, if you go to some countries where, poverty is just right in front of you every minute of every day, right? We don't see it in this country in that way. Yes, we see rough sleepers, but we really don't see it. We don't see it. It's there. But it can be overwhelming. And, there's something called the Goldilocks effect. If something is too overwhelming, then we're just going to walk away from it. I can't do anything about it. Yeah. If it's not really an issue, or it only affects a few, well, then it's hardly worth bothering about. So we need something that's challenging but not overwhelming, and it's framing it in that way. So, and I think, Jo, you're doing such a fantastic job with your podcast. It's just about helping us think and analyse and move away from just maybe accepted beliefs. That classic, there's a lie in every belief.
Yes.
Not in every belief, but there is a lie. And every belief has a kernel of truth, but it gets wrapped around. And I don't think even consciously or anything, it's just things sometimes that, like they say, there's nothing less common than common sense.
Yeah. I mean, do you think we've kind of reached an age where we're free to express, we
Absolutely.
have no fear of what people think about it, and that is very liberating.
It is. It is. Yeah. It absolutely is, and that that's something that anybody sensible watching this will know to speak to Jo and I more, so that we can share our wisdom more. It's fresh ideas, fresh thinking about things. Because if something is intractable, that means we're not actually looking at what the problem is. We're just looking at a symptom. Yeah. If we can't solve it, it's not a problem. It's a symptom. We need to go beyond that.
So I always like to ask a couple of questions at the end, which the first one, I'm sure you've thought of this before, is what piece of advice would you give to your much younger self?
I would not take things almost so personally. I was mentioning, as a child, I used to, if I was distressed, I used to sit brushing my hair, right? That was my thing. That was my soothing mechanism. One day, my mum told me off for being vain, right? I didn't even remember this. I couldn't, and this is a really interesting thing. I had no memory of that, but I do know that my hair has been the bane of my life. And I have a wonderful hairdresser, and I think I probably drive her mad because my hair looks lovely when she does it. And then she goes, if only you just learn to blow dry it, right? And I'd be like, well, I could, but I'm not going to bother. But actually, because what I was doing subconsciously was, being told I was vain was an act of disapproval from my mum. Not that she would have in any way thought, and I couldn't even remember it, but it was locked in. So actually, it's about talking to people, looking at, getting people to tell us the things that we can't see about ourselves, and sharing and asking for help. So sharing much more is definitely.
That's it. And I mean, I think you rightly say that people say things to very young children, not meaning to be cruel.
No.
And but you carry that with you for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
And that is, I think as parents and grandparents, we have to be sort of aware of that. The final one is bucket list.
Right.
What do you, I mean, I'm sure it's going to be very long because you've clearly only just got started. What are the key things that you still want to achieve?
Oh, what do I want to achieve? Well, I would like to see us well on the pathway to ending poverty and creating world peace. I really would, and I really do believe that Actually, I would say not in my lifetime, but I don't actually believe that, to be honest, because I think that things can change overnight. Once we know something, once we got something, we just automatically will act to follow that.
Things can change overnight, didn't it?
It did, and I think that was it. I think it's also is. To go back to mosquito analogy, anyone who thinks they're too small to make a difference has never slept with a mosquito. So there's issues there. I think, I think being out there sharing, and it's the ripple effect. You know, they say, if you know 6 people, you know the world. Yeah. Well, do you know what? If we can if we can make a difference in 6 people's lives and they can move on, we can change this world. Yeah. So, my real bucket list is to see a world where we just enjoy what we have, share what we've got, and all I can do is go out and model it, smile at people.
Fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much, Jo. It's been a joy to be here.